Principal, we are very thankful to you for coming to the department. And आपका बहुत बहुत खैर बहुत बहुत स्वागत है कि आप यहाँ तशरीफ लाए और आपने हमारी हौसला अफजाई की. Thank you, sir. This seminar provides our postgraduate students with an excellent platform to share their research and insights on two legendary figures of literature, Aristotle and Francis Bacon. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed principal, Professor Ashok Arya ji, faculty members, and dear students for gracing this occasion with their presence. Thank you, sir. Now we request our honorable principal to kindly share a few words of encouragement with us, क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ एग्जाम्स शुरू हो चुके हैं. आज से पहला पेपर है, इसलिए मैं सर का जो शेड्यूल है बहुत टाइट है, तो मैं गुजारिश करूँगा प्रोफेसर अशोक आर्या जी से, अपने कॉलेज के प्रिंसिपल साहब से, कि वो यहाँ तशरीफ़ लाएं और आशीर्वचन जो है बच्चों को कहें. आई वुड रिक्वेस्ट मिस्टर प्रिंसिपल टू से अ फ्यू वर्ड्स.
थैंक यू हेड साहब. आदरणीय फारूकी सर, वेदवान सर एंड अदर फैकल्टी मेंबर्स और सभी प्यारे बच्चों, पीजी सेमिनार सभी विभागों में हो रही है, तो अंग्रेजी में नहीं हो पा रही थी, तो मैंने फारूकी सर से रिक्वेस्ट की थी, तो सर ने मेरे आग्रह को स्वीकार किया है, उसके लिए शुक्रिया और धन्यवाद. और बेटे, जो स्नातकोत्तर सेमिनार है उससे आपके जो विचारों अभिव्यक्ति की वो अभिव्यक्ति मिलेगी, आपको यहाँ बोलने की जो घबराहट रहती है वो नहीं रह पाएगी और आराम से आप अपने सब्जेक्ट के बारे में बोल पाएंगे. और उसके लिए मैं अंग्रेजी विभाग के सभी संकाय सदस्यों को, हेड साहब को बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया और धन्यवाद देता हूँ और आपके उज्जवल भविष्य की शुभकामनाएं करता हूँ. और मैं आशा करता हूँ कि आप सब सही संचालन करके इस अंग्रेजी विभाग के सेमिनार को सफल बनाएंगे. इन्हीं के साथ आप सभी का शुक्रिया और धन्यवाद.
Thank you so much, sir, for your inspiring words. Your guidance and support truly motivate our students to strive for excellence. Now, we move on to the heart of today's seminar, paper presentation on Aristotle and Francis Bacon, two giants of English literature. 5 students will present papers. That is, MA previous students will present papers on Francis Bacon, and 5 from final year would present papers on Aristotle. So to begin the proceedings of the paper presentation seminar, first of all, I call upon from MA previous. So to begin with, I request the participants to be concise. I have got the list. Thank you so much, sir. First of all, I call upon Khushbu Saini. Khushbu Saini is presenting her paper on worldly wisdom in Francis Bacon's essays. Khushbu Saini.
Here I am presenting a presentation on worldly wisdom in Francis Bacon's essays. Bacon is widely regarded as one of the greatest prose writers in English literature and is often called the father of English prose. His essays are filled with practical advice aimed at achieving success in the world. Unlike moral idealist, Bacon approaches life with a pragmatic mindset, prioritizing knowledge, strategy, and personal ambition over strict ethical principles. His works reflect a blend of philosophical inquiry and political acumen, making his essays both insightful. Scholars arguing that he prioritized ambition over morality, meanest of mankind. Despite such criticism, there is no doubt that Bacon's essays offer valuable insights into human behavior, leadership, and the pursuit of success. This paper examines his worldly wisdom, focusing on how his essays provide practical lessons on navigating life's challenges. Worldly wisdom, a definition. Wisdom is often regarded as the highest form of knowledge, and wisdom, however, refers specifically to the kind of knowledge and strategies required for achieving success in practical affairs. While it generally advocates fair and ethical means to attain success, it does not necessarily reject the use of cunning or strategic deception when necessary. This aligns closely with Machiavellian principles, which emphasize pragmatism over idealism in political and social matters. Bacon as a worldly wise thinker. Bacon's essays are a rich source of practical knowledge, offering strategies for gaining power, wealth, and influence. He was deeply influenced by the Renaissance spirit, which emphasized the pursuit of knowledge and the accumulation of power. His essays reflect his mindset, providing readers with guidance on how to navigate the complexities of human relationships, leadership, and ambition. Bacon's advice is not purely ethical, rather, it is deeply pragmatic. He does not dismiss moral values outright but subordinates them to the larger goal of worldly success. His essays emphasize qualities such as shrewdness, foresight, judgment, and tact, all of which are essential for achieving one's ambitions. Worldly wisdom in Bacon's essay. Bacon's essays offer practical advice on a range of topics, including knowledge, leadership, and morality. His insights are often realistic, sometimes even cynical, reflecting his belief that success requires both intelligence and strategy. In Off Studies, Bacon discusses the purpose of education, emphasizes its practical benefits. Quote, reading make the full man, conference a ready man, and write an exact man, unquote. This demonstrates his belief that knowledge should be acquired with discernment, focusing on what is useful rather than pursuing learning for its own sake. Morality and deception. In Of Truth, Bacon explores the nature of truth and falsehood. While he acknowledges the value of truth, he also recognizes the role of deception in human affairs. A lie faces God and shrinks from man. However, he also concedes that falsehood has its uses. A lie doth ever add pleasure. This dual perspective illustrates Bacon's understanding of human nature. While truth is noble, deception can sometimes be advantageous. His moral philosophy is not rigid, rather, it is flexible and adaptable to circumstances. Ambition and success. In Of Ambition, Bacon describes ambition as a powerful force that can drive individuals to great height but also lead to their downfall if unchecked. He advises rulers to be mindful of ambitious individuals, using them wisely while preventing them from becoming threats. His perspective is purely pragmatic. He does not dismiss ambition as evil but sees it as a tool that must be carefully managed. Bacon's worldly wisdom in his personal life. Bacon's own life reflects the principle he preached in his essays. As a lawyer and statesman, he was deeply involved in political maneuvering. In Of Suitors, he advises lawyers to be honest about the chances of winning a case, yet he also suggests charging higher fees when switching sides, an approach that reflects his pragmatic mindset. One of the most striking examples of Bacon's worldly wisdom in practice was his betrayal of his benefactor, the Earl of Essex. Despite Essex's support, Bacon did not hesitate to act against him when it served his interest. This decision, while politically advantageous, has been criticized as opportunistic. It exemplifies Bacon's belief in prioritizing practical success over personal loyalty. Conclusion: Francis Bacon's essay provide a wealth of practical wisdom, offering insight into power, ambition, morality, and success. His approach is deeply pragmatic, reflecting a belief that intelligence and strategy are essential for achieving one's goals. While his writings have been criticized for their cynical and utilitarian outlook, they remain valuable guides for understanding human nature and the complexities of life. His essays continue to be relevant today, offering timeless lessons on leadership, decision making, and personal ambition. Thank you.
This was Khushbu Saini presenting her paper on worldly wisdom in Francis Bacon's essays. I would suggest the participants to be a bit louder so that your voice can reach till the last bench. Okay? Now next I call upon, again from MA previous year, Aishwarya Saini. Aishwarya Saini is presenting her paper on the aphoristic brilliance of Francis Bacon, a study of his prose style. She is presenting her paper on Francis Bacon's prose style. This is a very important question. I request everybody to listen to her very carefully, very keenly, very closely. Why? Because this is a question which is repeatedly asked in your exam. So, if you are participating in this event, even if you are not participating the way Aishwarya is participating, you are just attending, you are benefited, may by attendance, may by listening to the participants, because these are the questions that they are talking about, which are very important from the examination point of view. Okay, here it is, Aishwarya Saini.
Good morning to all the respected teachers, my seniors, my colleagues. My name is Aishwarya Saini, student of MA Previous. First of all, I would like to thank all the teachers to give me opportunity to present a paper. Today I am here to present a paper on the aphoristic brilliance of Francis Bacon, a study of his prose style. Francis Bacon is one of the most influential figures in English literature, particularly known for his prose style. His essays, first published in 1597 and expanded in later editions, reflect the intellectual rigor and stylistic innovations of the Renaissance. While some critics admire his rhetorical power and grace, others find his style rigid and terse. However, all agree on his stature as one of the foremost writers of English prose. Bacon's style is unique, concise, aphoristic, and marked by a formal detachment that distinguished him from later essayists such as Montaigne and Charles Lamb. Aphoristic brevity and terseness. One of the most striking features of Bacon prose is its aphoristic quality. His sentences are characterized by extreme brevity and conciseness, often assembling maxims or proverbs. Dean Church aptly observes that Bacon's sentence, quote, come down like the strokes of a hammer, unquote. This terseness is achieved through the omissions of superfluous epithets, conjunctions, and connectives, allowing his writing to be both rapid and forceful. Examples of his aphoristic style include, quote, a lie faces God and shrinks from man, unquote. This is from Of Truth. Quote, a mixture of lie doth ever add pleasure, unquote. This is also from Of Truth. This ability to compress profound ideas into a few words gives Bacon's prose a sense of authority and universality. However, this extreme conciseness occasionally leads to interpretative difficulties, as some sentences require carefully analysis to extract their full meaning. Use of balance and antithesis. Another defining characteristics of Bacon's style is his frequent use of balance and antithesis. He structures his sentence in a way that juxtaposes contrasting ideas, creating a rhythm that enhances their rhetorical impact. This technique, often seen in his essays, reflects his habit of weighing the pros and cons of an argument before allowing the reader to draw conclusions. For example, in Of Marriage and Single Life, Bacon states, quote, nuptial love maketh mankind, friendly love perfect it, but wanton love corrupt and embase it, unquote. Here the structure of the sentence presents three contrasting types of love, nuptial, friendly and wanton, each with its corresponding effect on human nature. This balanced style reinforces for the essay's argumentative rigor while adding to its aesthetic appeal, rhetorical persuasion, and use of figurative language. Bacon's essays are not merely intellectual exercises, they are also persuasive. His rhetorical strategies include metaphor, analogy, and imagery, serve to engage and influence the reader. His later essays, in particular, show an increasing reliance on figurative language, which enhances the expressiveness of his arguments. Moreover, Bacon's use of allusions and quotations add depth to his writing. He frequently draws from classical mythology, the Bible, history, and proverbs, weaving these references seamlessly into his prose. This learned style, while dense, leads his essay a sense of erudition and authority, lucidity, and structural flexibility. Despite the scholarly nature of his writing, Bacon's prose is surprisingly accessible. His sentences, though short and compact, maintain a clarity that allows even complex ideas to be grasped with relative ease. Unlike his predecessors, whose prose often exhibited an elaborate and cumbersome structure, Bacon's style is flexible and dynamic. His grammatical structures, though sometimes loose, rarely leads to ambiguity, wit, and intellectual precision. Though Bacon's essays lack humor in the conventional sense, they are rich in wit. His ability to use words skillfully to create striking comparisons and to craft memorable phrases demonstrate his intellectual precision. While his styles demand careful reading, it ultimately rewards the reader with insight that are as relevant today as they were in his time. Conclusion. Bacon's prose style is distinguished by his aphoristic conciseness, use of balance and antithesis, rhetorical appeal, and intellectual depth. His ability to distill profound wisdom into succinct statement, coupled with his persuasive use of figurative language and allusions, ensures his place as a master of English prose. Unlike the personal and conversational style of Montaigne or Lamb, Bacon's essays are formal, authoritative, and intellectually rigorous. His contribution to English prose not only influenced his contemporaries but also set precedent for clarity and precision in his essay writing. With Bacon, English prose took a significant step forward, marking a transition toward the modern essay form. Thank you.
Aishwarya, just wait for a second here. This was Aishwarya Seni presenting her paper on the aphoristic brilliance of Francis Bacon, a study of his prose style. Yeah, Professor Vedwan, I would like to know, shall we have queries right at the moment, or shall we have it at the end?
We get the MA previous papers
Done.
Bacon done, and then we will discuss on Bacon in the open house. Then we'll start with the final year with Aristotle.
Okay, okay. Take your seat.
That the inputs come now.
Next participant from MA Previous is Akshita Seni. Akshita Seni is presenting her paper on Francis Bacon's essay of love. Akshita Seni. Akshita Soni. Okay.
A very warm good afternoon to my honorable professors and all those who are present here. My name is Akshita Soni and I am a student of ME Previous from Department of English. Today I would like to give a paper presentation on the topic of Francis Bacon's essay of love. Francis Bacon was a statesman, scientist and philosopher known for his empirical approach to knowledge and his skepticism toward human emotions and passion. His essay of love is one of his shortest yet most thought-provoking work, offering a critical examination of love's role in human affairs. Unlike the idealistic musings of Renaissance poet, Bacon presents love as a double-edged sword, capable of inspiring great achievements but also of leading individuals into folly and dream. This essay is divided into 4 parts. Love as a soul of folly. Bacon begins his essay as a distinguishing between 3 forms of love: nuptial love, friendly love, and wanton love. He asserts that while nuptial love is necessary for procreation and social order, it often lacks the passion and intensity found in romantic love. Friendly love based on companionship and mutual respect is viewed more favorably. However, Bacon reserves his sharpest criticism for wanton or romantic love. He sees as an irrational force that blinds individual and comprises their reason. Bacon warned against the danger of love, arguing that it can lead to men act foolishly, lose control over their judgment, and even neglect their responsibilities. He references historical and mythical examples, such as Antony and Cleopatra, to illustrate how love has led to great men to their downfall. This perspective aligns with Bacon's broader philosophy, which values reason, logic, and discipline over uncontrolled passion. Love and the public sphere. A key argument in of love is that love is particularly detrimental to those in positions of power. Bacon contends that love is more a private indulgence than a public virtue. A ruler or statesman who allow himself to be consumed by love risks losing his authority and effectiveness. He writes, quote, "Great spirits and great business do keep out this weak passion," unquote. This suggests that ambition and responsibility are incompatible with deep romantic involvement. Bacon's views reflect his broad political philosophy, which emphasizes the necessity of rational governance and strategic decision making. Love, in his opinion, introduces an element of unpredictability and weakness that can undermine a leader's ability to govern effectively. This idea resonates with Machiavellian principles, which advocate for the suppression of personal emotion in favor of political stability and power. Love as an inspiration for art and literature. Despite his overall skepticism, Bacon does acknowledge that love has its uses, particularly in the realm of art and literature. He observes that the poet and artist often draws inspiration from love, using it as a muse for their creative works. This admission, however, is made with a certain detachment, as if Bacon recognizes the artistic value of love but does not personally subscribe to its emotional appeal. He implies that while love may enrich the world imagination, it does little to contribute to the practical aspects of life. This perspective aligns with his empirical philosophy, which prioritizes tangible achievements over abstract emotions. Rhetorical strategies and style. Bacon's essay is marked by his characteristic aphoristic style, which concise, thought-provoking statements. His use of historical and literary references lends authority to his arguments, reinforcing his view that love has often been the downfall of great men. He also employs contrast, juxtaposing love with reason, passion with discipline, and private indulgence with public duty. His tone is analytical rather than sentimental, making clear that purpose is not to celebrate love but to critique it. This approach sets him apart of many of his contemporaries who wrote about love in an idealized or romanticized manner. Conclusion: Francis Bacon's Of Love presents a starkly pragmatic view of love, positioning it as a force that can lead to folly, weakness, and destruction. His emphasis on reason, discipline, and ambition over passion reflects his broader intellectual philosophy. While he acknowledges love as in role literature, he remains largely skeptical of its value in personal and public life. Bacon's perspective on love invites readers to reconsider the way in which emotion influence human behavior and decision making. His essay serves as a reminder of the tension between reason and passion, a theme that remains relevant in contemporary discussions about relationship, power, and self control. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my professors. Here, my presentation ends.
Thank you, Akshita. This was a nice presentation. Miss Soni gave a presentation on Francis Bacon's essay of love. The paper was very well presented, okay, and beautifully written. Next participant is Jagat Singh. Jagat Singh is presenting his paper on the futility of vengeance. A simple analysis of Francis Bacon's essay of revenge.
Hello everyone. First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Jagat Singh, pursuing my MA in English from this college. I am here to express my views on the futility of vengeance, a simple analysis of Francis Bacon's of revenge. Introduction. Francis Bacon's essay of revenge argues that taking revenge is an emotional reaction that ultimately does more harm than good. Instead of bringing justice, revenge creates endless conflicts and disturbs social order. This paper explores Bacon's main arguments against revenge, his views on justice, and how his ideas relate to modern discussions on ethics and law. Francis Bacon was an English philosopher, writer, and politician. His essays provide wisdom on many topics, including ambition, wisdom, friendship, and revenge. In Of Revenge, Bacon explains why revenge is dangerous and unwise, urging people to seek justice through legal systems rather than personal retaliation. Main ideas in Of Revenge. First, revenge opposes justice. Bacon's first argument is that revenge goes against justice. He writes, revenge is a kind of wild justice which the more man's nature runs to, the more ought law to weed it out. Here he compares revenge to wild justice, meaning it is uncontrolled and dangerous. Instead of fixing problems, revenge replaces fair laws with personal anger, leading to chaos. Bacon believes that government and legal systems should prevent revenge and ensure justice is done properly. Second, the never-ending cycle of revenge. Bacon warns that revenge leads to an endless cycle of retaliation. He explains that those who focus on revenge remain stuck in their anger and pain. He that studieth revenge keepeth his own wounds green, which otherwise would heal and do well. In this metaphor, Bacon compares revenge to a wound that never heals. A person who constantly seeks revenge, remains emotionally wounded, and cannot move forward. His idea connects with modern psychology, which shows that letting go of anger leads to emotional healing and peace. Third, when revenge might be justified, even though Bacon mostly disapproves of revenge, he recognizes that in some rare cases it may be necessary. He writes, but base and crafty cowards are like the arrow that fleeth in the dark. Here, he suggests that when someone secretly causes harm and escapes justice, revenge may seem justified. However, Bacon does not fully support revenge. Even in such cases, he still believes that legal action is the best way to handle wrongdoing. How Bacon writes his argument: first, clear and logical thinking. Bacon structures his essay logically, moving step by step from why revenge is irrational to its harm effect and the importance of justice. This method shows his belief in reason and careful thinking. Second, use of metaphors. Bacon makes his idea more powerful by using metaphors. For example, comparing revenge to wild justice and an unhealed wound helps reader understand why revenge is dangerous and harmful. Bacon's ideas in the context of his time. Bacon's view reflect Renaissance humanism, which emphasized reason, law, and social stability. During medieval times, revenge was often seen as a form of divine punishment. However, by Bacon's time, thinkers were beginning to focus more on justice through law rather than personal revenge. Bacon's ideas also construct with the literature of his time, such as Shakespeare's Hamlet and Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, which explore revenge as a deep moral question. Unlike these works, Bacon does not see revenge as heroic or meaningful. He rejects it as foolish and harmful. Additionally, Bacon's ideas connect with modern legal and ethical discussions. Today, many legal systems focus on rehabilitation and justice rather than punishment and revenge, aligning with Bacon's argument that revenge only leads to further harm. Conclusion: Francis Bacon's of revenge is a strong argument against the idea of taking justice into one's own hands. He explained that revenge is irrational, keeps people trapped in pain, and leads to endless conflict. While he acknowledged that some situations might tempt people to seek revenge, he ultimately insists that justice should come through law, not personal vengeance. Bacon's essay remains relevant today in a world where personal grudges and conflicts still lead to violence. His message encourages rational thinking, emotional healing, and pursuit to justice over revenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jagat. This is how I want paper presenters to present their papers in a loud voice so that you are audible to everyone. That was full of energy. And this is how I expect the subsequent presenters also to present their papers the way Jagat has presented. He spoke on the futility of vengeance. Next participant is Khushikant Sharma. He is speaking on the analysis of Francis Bacon's essay, The Envy. He is speaking on The Envy.
Good afternoon, teachers, my seniors, and my classmates. I am Khushikant Sharma, pursuing MA previous from this college. Today I am going to present my paper on analysis of Francis Bacon's essay of Envy. Francis Bacon was a philosopher, statesman, and essayist known for his empirical approach to knowledge and sharp insights into human nature. His essays, first published in 1597 and expanded in later editions, offer reflections on morality, politics, and personal conduct. Of Envy is one such essay in which Bacon dissects and destructive nature of envy, its manifestations, and its role in shaping human affairs. Envy, according to Bacon, is a powerful and often hidden force that drives human competition, resentment, and conflict. He views it as a vice deeply embedded in both individuals and societies, influencing everything from personal relationships to political power struggles. The essay serves as a moral and practical guide, warning against the dangers of envy while offering insights into how to recognize and counteract its effect. This paper examines the themes, structure, and rhetorical strategies of envy, considering its relevance in both Bacon's time and the present day. Firstly, we will discuss the nature and causes of envy. Bacon began by defining envy as the feeling of pain at another's good fortune. Unlike admiration, which inspires emulation, envy produces resentment and hostility. He notes that envy is often directed at those who achieve success or prominence, particularly when that success appears undeserved or threatens one's own status. One of Bacon's key observations is that envy flourishes in societies where people perceive opportunity as limited. When individuals feel they cannot rise without displacing others, envy becomes more pronounced. This insight remains relevant in modern discussion on economic competition, social mobility, and workplace dynamics. Bacon also highlights certain conditions that breed envy. First one is public visibility. Those who achieve fame or high positions attract more envy because their successes are widely known. Second one is sudden rise to power. Individuals who rise quickly provoke envy, as their peers may feel they have not paid their dues. Third one is singularity or distinction. People who stand out due to exceptional talent, intelligence, or virtue often become targets of envy. Through these observations, Bacon reveals envy as not merely an individual vice, but a social phenomenon shaped by broader structures of power and competition. Next, we will discuss the effects of envy. Bacon describes envy as inherently destructive both for envious person and for society. Unlike anger, which flares up subsides, envy is a slow burning emotion that leads to malice and secret plotting. He warns that those consumed by envy often seeks to undermine others through slander, manipulation, or political intrigue. One of Bacon's most striking insights is that envy tends to be indirect. Envious individuals rarely admit their true feelings. Instead, they make their resentment with false justification. This idea anticipates modern psychological studies on passive aggressive behavior and social resentment. Next, we will discuss the relevance of contemporary society. Although written in the early 17th century, Bacon's insights into envy remain strikingly relevant today. In an era of social media where public visibility and comparison are most pronounced than ever, envy continues to shape human interaction. The rise of influencer culture, celebrity gossip, and online reputation management all reflect the same dynamics Bacon described. And finally, I conclude my presentation with this. Francis Bacon of envy remains a profound exploration of fundamental human emotion. By analyzing the causes, effects, and manifestation of envy, Bacon provides both a psychological and socio-political perspective on subject. His aphoristic style, historical examples, and practical wisdom make the essay a valuable text for understanding human behavior. In a world where competition, comparison, and resentment remains ever present, Bacon's insights continue to be relevant. Whether in politics, business, or personal life, the lesson of envy serves as a reminder of destructive power of resentment and the importance of self-awareness and ethical conduct in overcoming it. Thank you very much.
Very nice, Mr. Khushi Khan. Now, we have only one participant left from MA previous year. It's really nice that this year we had 6 participants from MA previous year. In the other disciplines, you would find that only 3 or 4 papers are presented. But here we have 6 papers from MA final year. So that's a big, deal in a way. We can brag about it. The last participant from MA previous is Miss Yatika Seni. Yatika Seni is presenting her paper on married and single life, an essay by Francis Bacon. Yatika Seni.
Good afternoon, teachers and my dear friends. So, I'm Yatika Sani and I am pursuing MA from this college. So, today I will present the paper presentation on topic Marriage or Single Life Essay of Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was an English lawyer, statesman, essayist, historian, intellectual, reformer, philosopher, and champion of modern science. In Of Marriage and Single Life, Bacon compares the conditions of married couples and bachelors. Bacon's essay looked at the good and bad sides of being married and being single. He also wrote insightful essays on various topics. Advantage and disadvantage of both marriage and single life. Bacon's essay explored the advantages and disadvantages of both marriage and single life. He argues that married men are often more responsible and productive in the society, contributing more to business and civic life. However, he also points that single men have greater freedom and can dedicate themselves to more ambitious projects unburdened by family responsibilities. While acknowledging that wives and children can be a hindrance to great achievements, he also notes that provide emotional support and act as a sort of hostage to fortune, encouraging man to act responsibly. Essentially, Bacon includes that neither state is universally superior and the best choice depends on the individual's personality, aspirations, and circumstances. Marriage as a source of responsibility and stability. He encourages that marriage has virtue and discipline. He says that when you get married, you are not just thinking about yourself anymore. You have a spouse to consider and potentially children later on. This automatically brings a sense of responsibility. This responsibility can be a stabilizing force. It gives lives a new focus and purpose. Marriage often involves building a life together, a home, finances, and a future. Historically, marriage comes with certain social explanations. Married peoples are often seen as more settled and mature. Marriage can provide a strong emotional support system. This emotional security can help people navigate life's changes more effectively, leading to greater stability in their personal and professional lives. The act of committing to another person, building a life together, and potentially raising children creates a sense of purpose and groundedness that can positively impact on individuals' life. Bachelor's freedom and productivity. Bacon argues that married men have significant responsibility towards their families. On the other hand, bachelors are free from these responsibilities. They have more time to focus on their own pursuits, whether it's their career, hobbies, or intellectual endeavors. This freedom allows them to dedicate themselves fully to their work without distractions. Bachelors have greater mobility and flexibility. They can easily move to a new city for a better job, travel for research or business that might not be feasible for married men. It explored their different paths and broadened their horizons. Conclusion. Francis Bacon's Of Marriage and Single Life offer a paradigmatic exploration of one of life's fundamental choices. Bacon's essay doesn't have a clear-cut conclusion that says marriage is better or single life is better. Instead, the concludes that both marriage and single life have their own good and bad points. He wants readers to understand these traits off and make the best choice for themselves based on their own lives and what they want. He reminds us that there is no one size fits all answer and that the decision is a personal one. Basically, Bacon thinks neither is better overall. It just depends on what kind of person you are and what you want out of your life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yatika Seni. That was indeed a very nice paper, very well written and very well presented, beautifully presented. That was full of energy, and this is how I want the other participants to present their papers. I thought the girls wouldn't present the papers with energy the way boys were doing, like Jagat and Khushi Khan. But Yatika has come out with a nice presentation, with nice voice. She seemed confident and poised. That's really great. girls, our departments are predominantly women's department in a way, because 90% are girls there. So you must feel confident. You must be, like full of energy, poise, coolness, confidence. These are the characteristic traits that we look for in our students. Now, well, I would like to tell you that all the 6 participants have presented their papers on Francis Bacon. If you have any queries, then you may ask the participants. We have, Khushbu Saini. She presented paper on worldly wisdom in Francis Bacon's essays. Aishwarya Saini presented paper on Bacon's prose style. Akshita Saini on Bacon's essay of love. Jagat on the futility of vengeance. And Khushikant presented his paper on essay of envy. And Yatika Saini of married and single life. Yes. Are there any queries to the participants? Are there any queries? Anything you like, the participants are ready to face the queries. And they have come well prepared. So would you like to ask something to them? If, or you feel that they were good enough, and please come over. Okay.
All the 6 participants, they have presented really good paper, well researched, and of course there were some pronunciation type of mistakes, so that you will overcome if you go on reading and reading and reading, है ना? अगर आप recite करेंगे, then you will overcome all these shortcomings. Really good papers, and we have opposite sides also. One was reading on love, the other on revenge, the other on envy. Then we have married and single life. So Bacon, you have all addressed the house that he was a philosopher, he was a scientist, and he was also a very shrewd politician. His essays are very brief, very brief. You might have read the text. You have written your document, you have presented your papers, so you might have gone through the text also of these essays that you have presented. They are very brief and very scientific, pinpointed, as you have been addressing the house again and again, that very precise, pinpointed, and very pragmatic. Pragmatic, you all know the meaning of pragmatic? Come on. All of you have used this word pragmatic in your papers. Now, what is the meaning of this pragmatic? Yes? Insisted upon. Pragmatic. Pragmatic, of course, is practical. What you observe in the real world, that has been very, very, minutely observed by Bacon, and he has put his thoughts, he has put his logic, he has developed his logic in his essays through those observations, minute observations, whether it is about politicians, whether it is about, studies. We have another essay. Then we have of friendship, we have of love, then revenge, envy, married and single life, old age. So what he observed minutely in the society, he has presented his thoughts, very well researched thoughts, into his essays. And I would like to request you all present here, whether it is MA Final, MA Previous, or your friends, suggest them to read Bacon. Even in political science, people are reading Bacon. Those who are pursuing their masters in political science, they are reading Bacon. Why? Because he was also a political thinker. Both your writers here, Aristotle and Bacon, they were masters in politics also. And they have written their treatises on political topics also. So my request to very beautiful presentations, but my request is that you should also be prepared to face questions, है ना? अभी तो you are just showing your unity not to ask questions, and we are also very showing mercy that okay, let us spare the students this time. But in seminars, discussion, question and answer is after every presentation. So you should be ready to prepare for this, to face this question answer session also. अपने पेपर्स में से ही पुल आउट क्वेश्चंस कि इस पे भी क्वेश्चन हो सकता है, इस पे भी क्वेश्चन हो सकता है, इस पे भी क्वेश्चन हो सकता है. So that will make your presentation much better and you will feel confident that okay, I have answered 5 questions, 5 queries or 5 observations. So you will feel confident, and next time when you are on this days presenting a paper, then you will feel okay, now come anybody, I'll face. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Vedant sir, for your insightful words. In fact, he was called upon to put queries to you, to MA Final, MA previous year presenters, paper presenters. But he was very merciful, very thoughtful. He started explaining the essays to you, the main ideas that you have, worldly wisdom. And we had a paper on worldly wisdom too. That's what he was trying to ask, pragmatic, what does it mean? So, we have pragmatism in his essays. This is one of the traits. Thank you so much, sir. We are done with MA previous. Now, we begin MA final year paper presentation. The first paper presenter is Anuksha Sirari. Anuksha Sirari is the first paper presenter. She is presenting her paper on the role of catharsis in tragedy, psychological and aesthetic dimensions. All MA final year paper presenters would present their papers on Aristotle. And Aristotle is there in paper 1, Principles of Literary Criticism. Yes, Anuksha.
Good afternoon, everyone, dear teachers and friends. Today, I, Anuksha Sirari, student of MA final year, would be presenting the paper to you, and the topic of today's topic is the role of catharsis in tragedy, psychological and aesthetic dimension. In the realm of ancient philosophy and literary theory, Aristotle stands out as a towering figure whose ideas continue to influence how we understand art and emotions. One of his most enduring contributions in the concept of catharsis, a term I need to begin it again. Extremely sorry. In the realm of ancient philosophy and literary theory, Aristotle stands out as a towering figure whose ideas continue to influence how we understand art and emotion. One of his most enduring contributions is the concept of catharsis, a term he used to describe the emotional experience of the audience when engaging with the tragedy. But what exactly does catharsis mean, and why did Aristotle consider this so vital to the experience of tragedy? Now, before I begin the topic, I would like to clear the etymology of the word catharsis. What does it stands for? The word catharsis has been taken out from the Greek word, which actually stands out for the catharsis, purgation and purification. It's a concept Aristotle introduced in his work Poetics. He described it as the process by which an audience experience a release of their engagement, release of emotion, particularly pity and fear, through their engagement with the tragedy. By experiencing intense emotions vicariously through the characters on stage, the audience could achieve a form of emotional cleansing and leaving them in a state of renewed equilibrium. Pity arises when the audience empathizes with the suffering of the character, often noble figures, brought down by the fate or a fatal flow. Fear, on the other hand, is evoked by the realization that such a suffering could also befall us or that we care about. Now, some of the important points or the functions that the catharsis has while doing having the tragedy is the emotional purification. How does the catharsis lead to the emotional purification? While looking at the tragedy, we are going to see that through the intense emotion of pity for the tragic hero or the fear of a similar fate, the audience undergoes a process of emotional release and leaving them with a sense of renewal. This aligns with the Greek belief in a drama as a form of therapy for the soul. Talking about the moral and intellectual alignment that we have through the catharsis, what happens by witnessing the downfall of the protagonist? Now, protagonist means the main hero or the character of the story or the drama. The audience gains insight into human nature, fate, and moral consequences. It allows the viewers to reflect on their own actions and choices. Now, we also talk about the aesthetic pleasures. Even though the tragedy deals with the suffering and the misfortune, Aristotle argues that it provides the pleasure through the artistic representation. This pleasure arises from the audience ability to engage with the deep human emotions in a controlled setting. Now, when we talk about the balancing emotion, the catharsis, it even leads us to the balance in our life. The thing we do is emotions. We are the emotional fellows, and balancing our emotions in our day-to-day life is the crucial point that we have. And it even talks about that instead of suppressing strong emotions like fear, sorrow, or compassion, tragedy provides us a healthy outlet for expressing them in a structured way. This emotional balancing makes individual more resilient in real life. Catharsis in classical or modern context. In Greek tragedies such as Oedipus Rex or Hamlet, catharsis occurs when the audience sympathizes with the tragic hero's suffering, yet finds himself in the resolution of the plot. Last but not the least, catharsis is a central to Aristotle's concept of tragedy, serving as the ultimate goal of the dramatic experiences. By arousing pity and fear, it allows the audience to process the complex emotions in a meaningful and transformative way. This therapeutic effect of the tragedy has made Aristotle Poetics a lasting influence on literary and dramatic theory across the centuries. Thank you very much, everyone. And whosoever has any sorts of queries can ask right now. Even to the respected teachers, if you want to ask something as a sort of query or doubt, Hansi, please. Sorry? Protagonist. Acha. Now you must have read about the drama, story, right? Films. You all are aware about the film, right? The main hero. That is known as the protagonist. Anyone else? And the qualities, good qualities that we say. And it's the human character that we are defined by the good qualities, and many a time we are criticized for our follies and all that. So it's combination of both, but the protagonist is the main hero of the title of the story. It even happens in our day-to-day life. Or no, the main hero, he must be. You have seen the movies dealt in the wrong sorts of what we say things we do. For instance, drinking ho gaya, fighting. Many a times hero has been shown, है ना? So that is what the protagonist means. Anyone else? Hamlet, you know, Hamlet. हाँ जी sir, Hamlet.
they have Hamlet in their course, so you can give the example of it.
Yes, sir. Hamlet and Oedipus, in which the Hamlet marries his mother unconsciously. He was not aware about the fact that he is marrying his mother. What happened was, huh?
Oedipus Rex.
Oedipus Rex, right, sir? Sorry, it was Oedipus. Hanji, Hanji. It was Oedipus, not Hamlet. Hamlet was the one who was, through the whole story, recognizing that whosoever has killed his father, he was just trying to find it out. And in the end, when he recognizes it, he kills his father's murderer, and in the end, he was demised. Hanji, Hanji, Hanji. Thank you, sir.
Well, just one more question to you. Now, the most important term in her paper was catharsis, because she was presenting paper on catharsis. Now, what is the common word we have for catharsis? Please tell them, Anusha. Common word.
Pent up of emotions and purgation. You must have seen of the incident that if somebody...
Purgation. Tell them purgation. Cleansing.
Cleansing. Yes, sir. I'm coming through that topic. In our day-to-day life, we have come across the topic that, okay, this person, somebody whosoever has been near or dear ones die, है ना? Many a time it even happens that near and dear ones, they don't cry. And the other one, they ask them to cry or they to express their emotions. What happened is that there is a psychological term, catharsis. Sigmund Freud has used this term as in his as a way to express the emotions. What happened is that whenever we have a sort of what we say in Hindi shock and Haji, a shock happened to a person and he doesn't express any emotion. So there is a setback which needs to be came out. So many a time what does is counselor he asks them to narrate a story, to ask them to get it out by their emotion. Many a time people while narrating their sorts of whatever shock they had or tragedy in their life, when they express it, they try to cry it out or they express the anger or whatever resentment emotions are there. Through this, they are pent off of emotion. Whenever the emotions are out, we feel relaxed and sort of relievement is there that something is out and we actually are comfortable while doing this. Purification. And purification only means the water filtered by our RO. The impurities are directed through the other canal and the purified water that we drink. That is what it means. Human is endowed with the each and every emotion. We have the relievement, what we say. We have the self-healing power. And this is what the catharsis means. There is a self-made process. Catharsis, you don't need anyone to let your emotions out. You can talk to yourself many a times, right? You do it. While writing it out, you take out your emotions. That's how you do it in a purification of your own soul. That's what it means. I hope
Anushka not only presented her paper beautifully, she also faced the queries very well, very confidently. And not only that, she was explaining you things from daily life. Like, we asked her what does catharsis mean. She said it means purification, it means cleansing, it means purgation. And she cited from the daily life. Like, suppose there occurs a death in some family. Then people want you to cry out, to just weep. Because when you cry out, when you weep, when you shed tears, then your emotions are cleansed. Okay, you are purged. And if you don't cry, what happens? That remains, the agony remains inside you. So this is what she was trying to say. She was choosing examples from the daily life. That was really a wonderful thing that she did to explain the audiences here, especially her younger group, students from MA previous year. Shivani will present her paper. Shivani, just wait a second. Ma'am is taking down the names of the participants. Shivani's paper is The 6 Elements of Tragedy in Aristotle Poetics. There are 6 elements, plot, character, thought, song, diction, music. So these are the melody, these are the 6 elements. So she will be speaking on these 6 elements. And the most important element is, yes, come on, tell me, which is the most important element in tragedy, according to Aristotle? Plot is the most important, right? So here comes Shivani with her paper on the 6 elements of tragedy in Aristotle's Poetics.
Good afternoon, everyone, respected teachers and my all dear friends. Today I am Shivani, I am a final student. I am going to present my views on 6-element tragedy, Aristotle Poetics. So here it is. According to Aristotle Poetics, a tragedy is built upon 6 initial elements. First, plot, second, character, third, thought, fourth, diction, fifth, song, and sixth, spectacle. With plot considered the most crucial, acting as the soul of the tragedy, is it through the arrangement of events and the action that the audience experiences the emotional depth of the play and achieves, characterizes the pouring of pity and fear. Now we will talk about plot. This is the foundation of tragedy, encompassing the sequence of events, the turning points, the climax, and the resolution. A well-structured plot should have a clear beginning, middle, and end, with each event logical following from the previous. Now the second is character. The character, particularly the tragic hero, are driving force behind the plot. Their faults, motivation, and choice contribute the tragic action, making them relatable to the audience. Third, thought. This element refers to the themes, ideas, and arguments expressed through the characters, and dialogue and action. It is the deeper meaning underlying the plot, provoking reflection, understanding with the audience. Fourth, diction. The choice of words, the style of language used by the character is crucial, conveying the emotion, intention, and character development. Fifth, song. In the context of Greek tragedy, song refers to the choral passage, which of the 10 provides commentary on the action, foreshadow events, and contribute the emotional impact of the play. Last, spectacle. This encompassing the visual elements of the production, including costume, sets, and stage effects, while considered the least important element by Aristotle. Spectacle can still enhance the overall experience of tragedy. Thank you.
She very concisely and precisely presented her paper on 6 elements of tragedy in Aristotle's Poetics. Now, are there any queries to her? Are there any queries to Shivani? Shivani, what do you understand? You said that a plot has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. What does Aristotle call this theory? Why is it important in the story?
So it is important because so in my views, it is the beginning because it is. So I am not able. So I am not.
Yeah, we have to have a beginning. Beginning is that part of the story from where you do not want to know what has happened before, what has gone before. And middle is the effect of the beginning. And end is the effect of the middle. So this is cause and effect theory that Aristotle talks about in his Poetics. Oh, okay. Which is the most important element in tragedy?
Plot.
According to Aristotle.
Plot.
It most important. We can have a tragedy without a character, without other elements, but we cannot have a tragedy without a plot. Plot has to be there. This is the most important element. Okay. Now we have the last participant, Rupin Sharma. Rupin Sharma is presenting her paper on Aristotle's definition of tragedy. Aristotle's definition of tragedy. This is very important. Okay, and I want everybody to listen to her very carefully. Rupin.
Greetings of the day to one and all present here. Today I, Rupin Sharma, is going to present my paper on Aristotle's definition of tragedy. Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher who wrote Poetics in 4th century BC, he analyzed different forms of poetry and drama. One of his most important contributions is his definition of tragedy. He described tragedy as a form of imitation mimesis that represent serious and important actions in a dramatic form. According to him, a well-written tragedy should evoke emotions of pity and fear in the audience, leading to their purification, a process he calls catharsis. In poetics, Aristotle defines tragedy as tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude in language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in separate parts of the play, in form of action, not narrative, through pity and fear effecting the proper purgation of these emotions. Let us break down this definition into key parts and explain each one in simple terms. First, tragedy is an imitation of an action. Aristotle believed that all art is an imitation, mimesis of life. However, tragedy does not simply copy real life. Instead, it selects and structures events to give them deeper meaning. A tragedy represents human actions, emotions, and struggles in a way that allows audience to relate to them. It shows people in difficult situations making difficult choices and facing the consequences of their actions. Second, it deals with serious and important actions. Unlike comedy, which deals with ordinary and ridiculous events, tragedy focuses on serious themes such as fate, justice, morality, and human suffering. The events in a tragedy are not trivial. They involve important matters like life and death, honor and dishonor, and the downfall of great individuals. For example, in Sophocles' or Oedipus Rex, the story revolves around fate, truth, and self-discovery. Oedipus' journey from being a respected king to a man who realizes his tragic mistake is a serious and important subject. Third, it is complete and has a certain magnitude. A tragedy should be well structured with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Aristotle insists that a plot must be complete, meaning it should not feel random or unfinished. The events should logically follow each other, creating a cause and effect chain that makes sense to the audience. Furthermore, tragedy must have a magnitude, meaning it should be grand and significant. It should not be about ordinary events, but something that has weight and importance. A story about a king losing his throne is more powerful than a minor conflict between two neighbors. It uses embellished language. Aristotle notes that tragedy uses artistic and elevated language. This does not mean the language is overly complicated, but it should have a poetic beauty. Tragic plays often use metaphors, rhythms, and sometimes even songs to enhance the emotional effect. The dialogue in a tragedy is crafted carefully to sound meaningful and powerful. For example, Shakespeare's tragedies such as Hamlet and Macbeth use poetic language to express deep emotions and philosophical ideas. Fifth, it is presented in form of action, not narrative. One of major difference between tragedy and other forms of literature such as epic poetry is that tragedy is performed as drama rather than being simply told as a story. In epic, a narrator describes event, while in tragedy, the audience sees the event unfold in real time through the events and dialogues of the character. This makes the emotional impact stronger because audience directly witness the struggles and downfall of the characters. 6. It arouses pity and fear. According to Aristotle, a tragedy should evoke two key emotions in the audience. First, pity, eleus. The audience feels sympathy for the tragic hero who suffers due to fate, a mistake or circumstance beyond his control. Second, fear, phobos. The audience fears that something similar could happen to them or to someone they knew. The emotional engagement is crucial for a successful tragedy. For example, in Macbeth, we pity Macbeth because he was once a brave and honorable man who is ruined by his ambition. At the same time, we fear the unchecked ambition could lead to destruction in real life as well. 7. It leads to catharsis. The final purpose of tragedy, according to Aristotle, is catharsis, which means the purging or purification of emotions. When audience experience intense pity and fear while watching a tragedy, they undergo an emotional release that brings a sense of relief and enlightenment. This does not mean tragedy makes people sad. Rather, It allows them to process deep emotions and reflect on human nature, morality, and destiny. It helps them to understand their own fears and emotions in a controlled way. We have some key elements of tragedy. Aristotle identifies 6 key elements which we discussed earlier in this seminar. First is plot, mythos, the most important element which refer to arrangement of events in the story. Second, character, ethos, the individual who carry out plot actions in the plot including the tragic hero. Third, thought, Dionia, the themes, messages, and ideas expressed in the play. Fourth, diction, lexis, the language and dialogues used in the play. Sixth, melody, melos, the musical elements including songs and rhythms. Eighth, spectacle, opsis, the visual aspect including costumes, stage effects, and scenery. Among these, Aristotle considers plot to be most crucial because a tragedy without a strong plot will not have a lasting impact. So, here we conclude this paper with the expression that Aristotle's definition of tragedy provides a clear framework for understanding dramatic storytelling. He sees tragedy as a serious and structured imitation of life that present important action in an artistic way. Even today, Aristotle's ideas continue to influence drama, literature, and film. From Shakespearean tragedies to modern plays and movies, the core principles of Aristotle's tragedy can be seen in stories that explore human flaws, fate, and consequences of our choices. By defining tragedy in poetics, Aristotle gave us one of the most enduring theories of drama that still shape our understanding of storytelling and emotional engagement. Thank you, teachers. Thank you, audience.
This was a very beautifully presented paper, in a sense that, when you are reading out something, you must be able to captivate interest of the audience, the spectators, the students who are sitting over here. So she was able to do that. She was able to captivate our interest. Her reading was captivating. This is how our reading should be. When you're presenting a paper, you should read it, like with feeling. You must feel the paper. When you understand the script, then you feel the paper. And when you read it, audience also participate with you. They feel captivated. Otherwise, your attention is diverted. So I congratulate Rupin Sharma for presenting her paper very nicely. And it was a very well written paper also. Yeah, she was talking about 6 elements as Shivani talked about. Now, I would like to know, are there any queries from student side? First from this, yeah. Anyone would like to ask any question to her? Anything which you could understand, where you want clarification, or what is your observation, anything? Yes, Akshita Soni is asking a question.
When a bad tragedy happens in someone's life, what a person can do to overcome this thing?
Tragedy is always bad. Bad tragedy, I have heard. Tragedy is always bad.
In that situation,
Magnitude, you are talking about the magnitude of the tragedy.
Severe tragedy you're talking.
Come again with the question.
when a bad tragedy happens in someone's life,
What do you mean by bad tragedy? First tell me.
How can you
tragedy means like some accidents or when someone get about the death of a person, when someone knows about it, and something bad happens in a person's life. So at that time, what is the attitude of the person, and what are the things that a person should do to overcome such things?
Okay, so should I? Okay. So you're asking that if something very serious happens to a person, he's not able to cope with the situation, what should one do? I think the first step should be accept your situation. Until and unless you don't expect that there's something wrong they have been done with me and we cannot reverse the situation. Sometimes what we do, we try to reverse the situation. We try that something happens and everything goes to the vanishes. Things don't vanish. They stay there. You have to accept the situation. And secondly, you have to grieve about it. Until and unless you don't grieve about the situation, you have to grieve about it as much as you can. And after a time, you have to keep a period that, okay, for this time I will grieve and after that I'll move on to life. Because we have to take our life to the way that it has to go. We cannot stop things, we cannot change things, we have to accept them, we have to grieve, and then we have to slowly move on through the life. And after a time you will notice that things we see which we feel that they are very big, they are very large, something bad has happened, in long run they seem to us very short, like a small dot in a line. So we should have to grieve and then accept the situation and then move on, do some hobbies, do some work of interest, so that we can divert our attention from the situations. Thank you. Any more questions? Sir, okay, please. Yes, sir.
There is a difference between Aristotelian thought and Shakespearean thought.
Yes, sir.
The unities of time, place, they should be followed. Does Shakespeare follow them?
No, they were, he was not completely following them. There was kind of a gap, and it was up and down. We cannot clearly experience what time and what was at place that events were happening.
Then in your paper you also mentioned music.
Yes, sir.
Yeah? And Aristotle insists that it plays a very vital role.
Yeah, Shakespeare had music. We have some nice.
I'm not talking about Shakespeare.
Okay.
I'm talking about Aristotle. You said that music plays very important
Yes, sir.
role. It's one of the elements. So how can music take on the tragedy? How does it emphasize the stress of
Yeah.
the tragedy? Or how
Sir-
does it help in purgating the
Emotions. Okay, I get it. So what we feel is music is very is of words but very different from words. In music we have a proper flow and very less words expressing very deeper meanings. So when we listen to some music, we get the exact word and exact feeling what we have in mind but could not express it. So if music expresses feelings more better than prose and words. So when in tragedy we insert music, we are making the intensity of emotions expressed more higher.
Very nice.
this is the exact word is the intensity.
Intensity.
But you can always quote from the films and from the music industry.
It works as
So many tragic films. So music there plays a very vital role.
Yeah.
it works as a safety valve.
Because,
Because,
what we have to express in word, we have to take 10 lines, and for music we have to just take a perfect one sentence and it expresses everything.
Orchestra can do
Yeah.
wonders. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Professor Vedwan was asking Rupin Sharma about three unities. Well, Aristotle, adheres to three unities. He says that a writer should adhere to three unities while writing a tragedy. He calls it poetry. Poetry here means a drama. So, while writing a drama, a writer should adhere to three unities, but Shakespeare doesn't always adhere to these three unities. That is why he breaches. Besides, Aristotle talks about perfect tragedy, which is a perfect tragedy where there is no comic element. But Shakespeare has mixed tragedy and comedy. We have tragicomedies in Shakespeare. So here again, Shakespeare breaches the rule. This was his question, and he was trying to ask Rupin Sharma about this, and Rupin Sharma has very nicely answered the queries. I congratulate her. Well, we are done with all the papers. We have had 6 papers from MA previous year and 3 papers from MA final year. A big round of applause for all presenters. It was indeed an enriching session filled with thought-provoking perspectives and deep analysis. Although Professor Vedwan has already spoken, yet he happens to be the senior most fellow there in the department, right? So I would like Professor Vedwan to reflect on today's seminar and share his valuable insights. Okay, please come and address the gathering.
Thank you, Dr. Farooqi. Now we are over with the part of seminar. Now let us be a bit of informal. All the presentations, they were very, very well researched. The presenters, they might have learned something. A is presenting in another style, B is presenting in some different style. So you might have now become familiar how your presentations mark and bind the audience, to listen very carefully. So the papers, of course, of Bacon we have talked. Now let us come to Aristotle. Aristotle's aspects have been discussed, barely discussed, his elements of a tragedy, then catharsis, purgation and all that. So it has all been discussed. My point in asking the question of the unity of time, place was that Aristotle, he focuses that the unity of place, it should be maintained. Tragedy, if it has happened in, say, Athens, it should be Athens. Place. But Shakespeare, one of his scene is in Athens, the other one scene is in London, the other scene is in some other country. So he keeps on changing places also. Aristotle, he focused that unity of place should be maintained. Then again, time. Okay. The effect of music we have talked. Professor Farooqi also pointed about the comic element, which is absent in Aristotle, but it is very much present in Shakespearean tragedies. It provides us comic relief. Watching a tragedy, when it is on its acme, on its higher point, what happens? I have seen in some of the films ladies weeping because they associate themselves with the tragic character. And this happens. When I was a kid, I was in, say, 7th or 8th class, a film happened to be released, and the name of the film was Bin Maa Ke Bacche. So, of course, with our parents, we went to the theater to have that film. Literally, ladies, they start weeping. So they were associating themselves with the character present in that tragic film. This happens. We associate ourselves with characters. Some of us, when we read Hamlet, some of us, we associate ourselves with Hamlet. Oh, this has happened to me also. I have also been betrayed. And I will take what? I will forgive. I will take revenge. It happens. Then in Macbeth also, what do you have in Macbeth? What kind of a character is Macbeth? Highly ambitious. And who is the catalyst? Who is the catalyst in Macbeth? Haven't you read Macbeth?
You haven't read? You don't know what Three Witches?
The Three Witches. And of course, Lady Macbeth. Some of your near and dear, some of your friend is talking, oh, you go through this, oh, yeah, you do this, everything will be fine. So, they act as catalyst and they raise your ambitions. And then when you are highly ambitious, then you of course take some other means also to achieve your goals. It happens. That is why Shakespearean tragedies are loaded with some comic element. Just to give a comic relief to the audience. Chalo theek hai yaar, the scene changes and we feel very, relieved ki chalo, let us know. You see so many, television series nowadays. They are imbibed, deeply imbibed in all these tragic elements and comic elements. Why? Because the audience associate. And what becomes hit? What becomes hit? What becomes a hit serial or a hit TV or a hit film or a hit drama? When audience, the readers, they enjoy and they associate themselves with the characters. So all these writers, they have minutely observed the society, they have minutely observed the characters present in the society. Of course, sometimes we also associate ourselves with the villains. It is not always that we associate ourselves with the protagonist. Sometimes we also associate ourselves with the antagonist also. विलन के साथ भी हमारी एसोसिएशन हो जाती हैं. Because ये सारे के सारे features, they are present in our personality. है ना? We have two faces of our personality. What face value is something different. The real I or the real me is something different. So my congratulations to all of you, to the house and to the department also. Nice presentations, and next time when we gather, the number should be much more than the present number. Okay. In the audience also and the presenters also. Congratulations and best of luck for your exams. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I really respect you for whatever you have enlightened us with knowledge that we have. But sir, why do we always need to control the women, or the gender biasness is there, like weeping is there for the women as well? Why can't men cry?
Men also cry, but they just don't.
Sir, we generalize in this context.
Let me give you an example. Have you been to some other emotional?
Your question was such that you had to explain this in such a detail. Yeah, and I think you must have read King Lear there in your MA previous year. There, you see King Lear in the storm scenes. He's so emotional there. He's holding his daughter there, Cordelia, in his hands. So just imagine the pathos he's going through. So he's a pathetic figure there. So men also feel the pain. He rightly pointed out that sometimes they do not express. All men do not express, but there are some men who even express like women. So there is no gender bias, Anuksha, here. It's not a gender bias, right? But women are more emotional comparatively. And you are right, this is how we see there in our society right from the beginning. As we come to the end of this academic session, it is time to express our gratitude to the principal who was here for some time, to the teachers of the Department of English, and to the audience, and to the presenters especially who presented beautiful papers today. So to do the honor, I call Dr. Mayank Garg to express formal vote of thanks.
So thank you, respected the HOD of the department, Dr. Farooqi, Dr. Vedwan, who is a professor here, Mr. Rajkumar. I thank first of all the principal of this college. Not only he gave the permission to organize the program, but he personally attended it for a while, and because of some other engagements he had to leave earlier, but okay, he was here and he was fully cooperative. Secondly, those who presented the papers, 6 of them were from MA Previous: Khushbu Saini, Aishwarya, Akshita, Jagat Singh, Khushikant, and Yatika Saini from MA Previous, and Anuksha, Shivani, and Rupin from MA Final. They all presented papers the students from MA previous presented papers on Bacon, his ideas expressed in his essays, his pragmatism, his worldly wisdom. Some of them presented papers on his style, his special style, aphoristic style, brevity, etc., other aspects related to his style. As we all know that essays were first used in France. Montaigne, started writing essays earlier than Bacon. And Montaigne's essays are like he behaves like a friend. He starts chatting with his readers. And Bacon is fully formal. He doesn't chat with his readers. He is aloof from his readers because Montaigne is like a friend to his readers and Bacon is like a teacher. Secondly, Bacon's sentences are pithy, cut off from each other. This happened because he used to write his ideas in a journal, in a personal diary, and later on he collected them and then he published them in three different, one volume in 1597. The same volume was improved in 1612 and later in 1625. Okay, so you spoke well on Bacon and his style. Some of you, like Akshita Soni, spoke on a particular essay by Bacon of love, Jagat Singh of revenge, Khushikant. He presented a paper on a particular essay by Bacon, The Envy, and Yatika Seni on marriage and single life. Now coming to MA final students presentation, Anushka Sirari, the role of catharsis in tragedy. Catharsis plays a very important role in tragedy. The aim of a good tragedy is to forget the feelings of the audience. Okay, so there are various meanings of purgation. Some say it is clarification, others say it is purgation, some others say different things. What does clarification mean? Clarification is, according to Humphrey House, is clarification of ideas, universal ideas we come to know, the audience come to know after watching a play or a drama. Secondly, Shivani, she talked about the 6 elements of tragedy in Aristotle's Poetics, talked about plot, importance of plot, character. There is an ongoing debate about the importance of plot. What is more important, plot or character? Different critics express their views in different manners, and some say that plot is more important, others say that characters are more important. So this is a good thing that there is a debate going on. Rupin, she talked about all the aspects of tragedy. The topic was Aristotle's definition of tragedy. So while she was presenting her paper, Shakespeare did not follow Aristotle's dictum several times. He breezed the rules laid down by Aristotle, like Shakespeare doesn't follow the 3 unities, and there is no hamartia in Shakespeare's plays. What is there in Shakespeare plays? There is character flow. There is a weakness in characters, whereas in Aristotle says that there should be a mistake by the hero. The hero should commit a mistake, and that mistake brings the downfall of the character. In Shakespeare, we have character flow like ambition, jealousy, these things, doubt, indecision, indecisiveness, all these things. So there is a difference.
So this was a lively program today. The presenters as well as the audience, the other students who did not present the papers, they were actively participating. You asked various types of questions, and this was a successful departmental seminar, and we are planning to organize such more seminars in coming months. I think we will organize seminars every month from March. Okay, so there may be a participation from all students. Those who could not present today will present next time. So the presenters worked hard. They went through the papers and they prepared the papers and they presented the papers. They answered the queries. That was really fine. And I thank you all for coming here, presenting papers, attending the seminar, taking part actively. Thank you all. Thank you very much.